1619, Episode 2. This episode sheds light on how impactful the construct of race has been and continues to be on American society and on American laws. It goes into why race as a social construct was created and how it's been used to delineate opportunity to some and deny opportunity to others. It goes into racial classifications and how even today these racial classifications are still a part of many legal documents. The most disturbing and harrowing discussion in this episode is based around the sexual and reproductive lives of Black women. The episode opens with narrator Nicole Hannah-Jones informing the audience of her mixed race. Her dad is Black and her mom is white. She talks about the vastly different experiences that her white grandparents had in this country versus that of her Black grandma. Her white grandparents had every opportunity available to them. They were afforded an opportunity to experience the, quote, American dream, while her Black grandma had to settle for whatever meager opportunity was left for her. We learned that this classification was a political tactic whose inception may be traced back to slavery. On the plantation, Black women were raped and bred like animals with impunity. At times, the slave masters picked which slave couples they wanted to procreate, and at other times the slave masters themselves would impregnate the women. A huge part of this activity was to multiply the slave population. If more slaves were simply bred rather than purchased, then that was more profit for the slave masters. And with the end of slave trading on the horizon, it was essential for slave masters to increase the count. This repulsive practice of breeding left no room for proper treatment or care of the slave girls and women who were forced into both hard labor on the fields and forced to endure hard pregnancy labor time after time. And I intentionally said slave girls because what viewers learn is that the slave girls were closely monitored. As soon as their menstrual cycle started, the slave masters considered them fair game. We learn how laws were made based off of racial identity early on. With the mixing of white men and African women, particularly slave women, the question arose about how the child would be labeled. British law at that time would have given the child the status of the father. Hence, the child would be entitled to the father's land and wealth. Of course, the white settlers didn't want that to happen because that would involve sharing the wealth. That would mean that slave babies could come up out of, if you will, slavery. Again, they didn't want that to happen, so they passed a law in 1662, which stated that the children of Black women would have the status of their mother, who were still enslaved. From there, we're taught about ideologies that perpetuated stereotypes and misinformation that would contribute to the abuse and mistreatment of African slaves and largely African women in particular. There were a number of white theologians who justified enslavement as part of natural order or God's divine plan. Also, leading 19th century pseudoscientists were claiming that African Americans had thicker skin, weaker lungs, smaller skulls. James Marion Sims, who is largely recognized as the father of gynecology, conducted brutal, inhumane experiments on Black women during the 1800s. He's credited with advancing the field of gynecology, but what's not often discussed about him is the horrific science experiments he conducted on Black women. He literally treated them as test subjects. He operated on them without anesthetizing them, even though anesthesia was available. He believed they were somehow immune to pain. My God, with foundations like this, it's no wonder why Black women today have so many issues finding doctors who empathize with their pain and offer appropriate treatment. Fast forward to modern times, Black women's fetal mortality rate is twice that of white women. Black women don't receive the same standard of medical care and are routinely undertreated for pain. Their pain is often ignored, dismissed, and normalized. And arguably, it goes back to the dangerous stereotypes created years ago. Doctors leading with those racial biases leave Black women at risk for neglect or something far worse to occur. Nicole interviews a young Black woman who tells her story. She recounts the experience she and her husband had while birthing twins. This woman is a working professional and her husband is a working professional. They are not a poor couple without access to a reputable health care plan. Nonetheless, their experience with their white gynecologist is heartbreaking and honestly angering to hear about. The episode ends with a discussion about additional stereotypes regarding Black women as hypersexual, tempting to white men, which is arguably just cognitive dissonance for white men's rampant sexual assault of Black women, particularly during slavery. It also touches on other demeaning, disrespectful caricatures such as the asexual mammy, the angry sapphire, and former President Reagan's infamous welfare queen. And it explores how these stereotypes influence social policy. In closing, episode 2 was very insightful and it touched on topics that are so relevant to today. As with each episode, I don't aim to give away too much detail because I want you to watch the episode for yourself. I hope you will support this docuseries. It's currently available on Hulu. It's well worth your time. Please feel free to comment below. Thank you for watching.